Imagine being drafted so late in the NFL that most analysts barely mention your name. Imagine hearing your critics say you are just a project, someone who would spend years quietly learning behind the scenes, maybe even forgotten before you ever got a chance to start. Now imagine that same rookie, a fifth-round pick no less, turning the business of professional football upside down before ever taking a single regular season snap. That's exactly what's happening with Shedeur Sanders, and the ripple effects are shaking the NFL to its core. This isn't just a story about a young quarterback chasing a dream. This is a story about power, about money, and about what happens when an athlete refuses to play by the old rules. For decades, rookies have walked into the league as employees. They signed their contracts, they played their games, and they were lucky if endorsements trickled in after a breakout season or two. But Shedeur Sanders? He walked into the NFL with an entirely different playbook, one that's rewriting the balance of power between athletes, teams, and billion-dollar brands. And here's the crazy part. It's working. We're talking about a player drafted 144th overall, a number most fans would barely remember, and yet within weeks, Sanders generated more than $250 million in jersey sales. Let that number sink in. A rookie quarterback barely in the league, selling more merchandise than established superstars. That alone would have been historic, but it's just the beginning, because Sanders didn't structure his contract like anyone else. Instead of settling for the standard rookie deal, he brought in a revolutionary clause, one that made him more than just a player. It made him a business partner. And that clause, that single detail buried inside the paperwork, has already earned him more money than his entire rookie contract. Owners are stunned. Executives are scrambling. Agents are asking if this is the future. And behind it all, Sanders just keeps on working, smiling, and letting the numbers speak for themselves. But numbers are only part of the story, because while the business world is losing its mind over Sanders, the cultural world is watching just as closely. Nike saw this moment before anyone else did. They bet on Sanders when he was still in college, signing him to a groundbreaking NIL deal that made headlines. They poured money, marketing, and vision into him long before draft night. And now, it looks like that gamble is paying off in ways no one thought possible. Still, with every move Sanders makes, the stakes climb higher. For every fan who sees him as the future of the game, there's a critic waiting for him to stumble. For every headline praising his vision, there's another questioning his maturity. The pressure is enormous, the spotlight unforgiving, and the road ahead uncertain. The question isn't just whether Shedeur Sanders can win football games. The question is whether he can carry the weight of an entire movement on his shoulders, because, make no mistake, what he's doing isn't just about sports. It's about changing the very rules of the game itself. When the numbers first hit the news cycle, people thought it had to be a mistake. A rookie quarterback taken in the 5th round of the NFL draft, somehow generating $250 million in jersey sales? It sounded impossible. But it wasn't. It was Shedeur Sanders, and it was real. $250 million. That's not just a statistic, it's a shockwave. For context, most rookies, even first-rounders with huge fan bases, might move a few $1 million worth of jerseys in their debut season if they're lucky. But Sanders? He blew past that ceiling before even stepping onto the field for a regular season game. And the craziest part? His cut from those sales came out to about $14 million. That's more than triple what his rookie contract with the Cleveland Browns pays him across 4 years. Think about that. Most rookies grind through their first few seasons hoping to stay healthy, prove themselves, and maybe secure a second contract that truly pays. Sanders short-circuited the process. Before he'd thrown a pass that counted in the standings, he'd already out-earned his base salary not with touchdowns, not with wins, but with branding power alone. And the NFL wasn't ready for it. Executives inside the league offices are used to controlling the narrative. They dictate the structure, the endorsements, and the opportunities that young players receive. But Shedeur's rise didn't come from the league. It came from the fans. It came from social media. It came from a cultural wave that saw Sanders not just as a quarterback, but as a brand, a personality, and a symbol of something bigger. The sales explosion sent every corner of the sports world into panic mode. Owners whispered about what this meant for their business model. Agents started asking why their clients weren't demanding the same kind of deal. Brands outside of Nike scrambled to figure out how they'd missed the boat. And perhaps most importantly, other rookies took notice. Because if Sanders could generate that kind of money while being drafted 144th overall, what did that mean for a future #1 pick with hype and spotlight on their side? The shockwave wasn't just financial, it was cultural. Jerseys weren't the only thing moving. Sanders' highlights went viral. His watch celebration became a meme. His name trended almost daily on Twitter and Instagram. Suddenly, this so-called project quarterback was bigger than many established stars. His reach stretched far beyond Cleveland. He wasn't just a Browns rookie, he was a global conversation. And here's the kicker. None of it was an accident. Sanders and his camp knew what they were doing. The jersey rollout was calculated. The timing was perfect. And the prime equity clause in his contract, the clause that gave him a slice of every sale tied to his name, ensured he was reaping the rewards in ways no rookie ever had before. That's why this wasn't just another rookie has hype story. This was the beginning of something seismic. The league had underestimated Shedeur Sanders. And in doing so, they let him expose the cracks in their system. But as massive as this shockwave was, it was only the beginning. Because behind the scenes, a single contract clause was about to change everything. At first, the numbers seemed unbelievable. How could a fifth-round rookie already be pulling in more than his contract was worth? The answer wasn't just jersey sales, it was something far more revolutionary. It came down to a single line in Shedeur Sanders' rookie deal, a detail so bold that most teams didn't even want to touch it. It was called the prime equity clause. Now, in most rookie contracts, players sign away their rights. Teams, brands, and the league itself profit from their name, image, and likeness, while the player takes home only their salary and whatever small endorsements they can scrape together. For decades, that's been the model. The player is treated like labor, a cog in a much larger machine. But Shedeur Sanders flipped that model on its head. With the prime equity clause, he demanded something no one else had ever pulled off in the NFL, a percentage of all revenue tied to his name. Jerseys, sponsorships, promotional content, even behind-the-scenes footage if it was built around Shedeur, he was getting a cut. He wasn't an employee anymore. He was a partner. And that changed everything. When those 250 million in jerseys sold, most rookies would have seen only the fame, not the fortune. But Sanders? His contract made sure he walked away with a payday that dwarfed his base salary. From that clause alone, he pocketed 14 million. Before his rookie year even began, he was already making veteran money not because of touchdowns or stats, but because he had the leverage to rewrite the rules. NFL executives hate this. Quietly, many owners admit it sets a dangerous precedent for them. Because if Sanders can get a prime equity clause, what's stopping the next generation of rookies from demanding the same? Imagine a top 10 draft pick, someone with even more hype and spotlight than Sanders, entering negotiations and saying, "I want his deal but bigger." Suddenly, the old system of teams controlling everything collapses. Suddenly, players are no longer just athletes, they're co-owners in their own brands. That's why, according to reports, this clause was a big reason Sanders slid so far in the draft. Teams didn't want to deal with it, they didn't want to lose control. They painted him as entitled, they whispered about his attitude, they questioned his focus on football. But none of those criticisms had anything to do with his talent. They were about the clause, the very thing that has now made him a trailblazer. And here's what makes it even more disruptive. Once a model like this proves successful, it's nearly impossible to put the genie back in the bottle. Other players will ask for it. Other agents will push for it. Brands, seeing how much buzz Sanders has created, will want similar deals. And the league? They'll be forced to adapt. The prime equity clause isn't just a contract detail. It's a symbol of a new era, one where athletes aren't just working for the system, they're working with it on equal footing. And for Shedeur Sanders, it's the weapon that turned a rookie contract into a business empire. But Sanders didn't do it alone. Because while the league dragged its feet, one company saw what was coming before anyone else. And they were ready to bet big. Long before the NFL realized what was happening, one brand had already spotted the storm brewing. That brand was Nike. Back in 2024, when Shedeur Sanders was still carving up defenses at Colorado, Nike didn't just see him as another college athlete with promise. They saw him as the face of a movement. The company moved quickly, signing Sanders as their first major NIL football athlete, locking him in before other brands could even get a meeting. But this wasn't your typical endorsement. Nike didn't just hand him a check to wear their logo. They invested in him like a franchise. Campaigns were built around his name, his personality, and his story. They weren't selling just sneakers, they were selling Shedeur Sanders. The connection to his father, Deion "Primetime" Sanders, only made the narrative stronger. In the 1990s, Dion had been one of Nike's most electrifying athletes, with his Air Diamond Turf sneakers becoming instant classics. Nike saw a chance to recreate that magic for a new generation. Shedeur wasn't just Dion's son, he was a player carving out his own lane, with his own swagger and his own fan base. So Nike went all in. They broke months of silence on social media just to spotlight Sanders. They dropped exclusive cleats and custom sneakers tied to his college highlights. They launched the Poetry in Motion campaign, a carefully crafted narrative that tied Shedeur's dominance at Colorado to his future in the NFL. Billboards popped up, hype videos spread online, and Nike began building momentum for a moment the league wasn't even ready for. By the time draft night rolled around, Nike had already laid the groundwork. They had products ready, campaigns designed, and a fan base primed. Everyone expected Sanders to go in the first or second round. The buzz was strong. But when his name didn't get called until the fifth round, number 144 overall, Nike didn't blink. If anything, the slide made their gamble even more powerful. The whispers of character concerns and bad body language didn't scare them. They understood what was really going on. Teams were worried about the very prime equity clause that made Sanders so different. But Nike? They weren't afraid of the new model. They were betting on it. The proof came just days later. Before Sanders even played his first preseason snap, Nike's marketing machine roared to life. They pushed custom cleats, highlight reels, and teasers across every platform. The captions weren't subtle. Only a matter of time. When Sanders finally stepped onto the field against Carolina, delivering 14 completions, 138 yards, and 2 touchdowns, Nike struck instantly. Within hours, they dropped a viral ad featuring his signature watch celebration. It racked up millions of impressions overnight. The message was clear. Nike wasn't just sponsoring Shedeur Sanders, they were building him into a cultural force. And as jersey sales exploded and social media caught fire, it became obvious that Nike's early bet had been right. They had seen what no one else did, that Sanders wasn't just a quarterback, he was a brand. And by locking him in early, they ensured that when the shockwave hit, they'd be standing right at the center of it. But not everyone saw it as genius. On draft night, when Sanders fell further than expected, darker whispers started spreading. And those whispers pointed to one of the NFL's ugliest traditions: coordinated character attacks. Heading into the 2025 NFL Draft, the buzz around Shedeur Sanders was undeniable. Analysts debated whether he could sneak into the first round. Some mocked him in the second, maybe third at worst. What nobody expected was for him to tumble all the way to the fifth round, a staggering fall to pick number 144. For fans, it was shocking. For insiders, it was suspicious. Almost immediately, whispers started to surface. Anonymous executives claimed Sanders had bad body language. Others hinted he was too focused on his brand instead of football. Some even said he was entitled. But here's the thing, these weren't fresh observations. They were the same recycled labels that so often appear when a player dares to demand something outside the league's control. And in Sanders' case, it wasn't about his talent, it was about his contract. Behind closed doors, many teams were spooked by the prime equity clause his camp insisted on. It wasn't just a new idea, it was a threat to the system. If one rookie could negotiate to be treated like a partner instead of an employee, what would stop others from trying the same? For owners used to having the upper hand, that was a nightmare scenario. So suddenly, the player who had torched defenses at Colorado, the quarterback who sold out stadiums and dominated headlines, was painted as high risk. And just like that, his draft stock plummeted. It wasn't the first time a prospect had been dragged by anonymous leaks. The NFL has a long history of using character concerns as a smokescreen, but the timing here was too convenient. The same qualities labeled as arrogance in Sanders were praised as confidence in other quarterbacks. The same focus on branding that got him criticized was celebrated when it came from more traditional faces of the league. The double standard was obvious. For Shedeur, it could have been a devastating blow. Sliding 3 or 4 rounds lower means less guaranteed money, less prestige, and less security. For most players, that fall becomes the headline of their career. But Sanders wasn't like most players. He had already built his safety net. His Nike deal was solid. His equity clause meant the real money would come from sales and sponsorships, not his rookie contract. And that meant the draft slide wasn't a death sentence, it was fuel. And for Nike, it was an opportunity. The company didn't care where he was drafted. If anything, the fifth-round narrative made for an even better story. The overlooked rookie counted out by the system, now proving everyone wrong. It was a storyline they could sell, and they did. Still, the whispers didn't stop. Critics said he was distracted. They said he was more influencer than quarterback. They predicted his brand would outshine his play. But as fate would have it, Sanders didn't have to wait long to answer them. His very first preseason performance turned those whispers into a roar. For weeks after the draft, the chatter around Shedeur Sanders wasn't about his arm strength, his leadership, or his poise in the pocket. It was about his character. The whispers from draft night still echoed. Too focused on his brand, too flashy, not fully committed to football. Critics called him a distraction before he had even taken a snap. Then came his first preseason game against the Carolina Panthers, and in just a few drives, everything changed. Sanders stepped onto the field with the weight of an entire narrative pressing down on him. Fifth-round pick, overhyped, branded before proven. But instead of crumbling, he played with a calm confidence that silenced the noise. 14 completions, 138 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, a passer rating north of 100. Those weren't rookie jitters. Those were numbers that demanded respect. It wasn't just the stats, though. It was the way he carried himself. In the huddle, he was composed. On the field, his timing was sharp, his accuracy crisp, his decision-making beyond his years. He didn't look like a developmental project. He looked like someone who belonged. And Nike was ready. Within hours of the game ending, their marketing machine struck. On Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, a polished ad dropped featuring Sanders' now iconic watch celebration. The caption read, "Only a matter of time." The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Fans were already buzzing about his performance, and Nike amplified that energy into a cultural moment. The video racked up nearly 200, 0 likes, and millions of impressions in less than a day. The effect was electric. Overnight, Sanders went from being the fifth-round experiment to the league's hottest rookie. Jersey sales, already astronomical, spiked again. Merchandise tied to his name flew off shelves. And suddenly, the same executives who had doubted him were watching highlight reels and wondering if they had miscalculated. But this wasn't just a win for Sanders. It was validation for the entire model he and his camp had built. His contract clause meant he wasn't just creating buzz, he was cashing in on it. Every jersey, every shirt, every piece of merch sold off the back of that preseason performance went directly into his pocket. For the first time, the traditional gap between hype and pay had been bridged by design. And the fans? They were all in. Social media exploded with clips of his throws, his composure, and his celebration. Hashtags trended, memes spread. People weren't just watching a rookie quarterback, they were watching a star being born in real time. For the critics, it was a humbling moment. The character concerns sounded hollow when the scoreboard lit up. The whispers about his focus seemed laughable as he orchestrated drives with precision. Sanders hadn't said much since draft night, but in that preseason debut, his play said everything. He was ready. Of course, one game doesn't make a career, but for Sanders, that preseason proof was more than just a good night on the field. It was the spark that turned skepticism into belief, and belief into a full-blown movement. And while the NFL scrambled to adjust to this new reality, Nike was already 2 steps ahead. Because what came next wasn't just about jerseys or highlight reels, it was about turning Shedeur Sanders into a global brand. By the time Shedeur Sanders wrapped up his first preseason outing, Nike wasn't just celebrating a good debut, they were rolling out a master plan. What had started as a rookie endorsement quickly transformed into a full-scale brand launch. And the strategy wasn't local, it was global. Nike knew the jersey sales alone were already historic, but they weren't stopping there. Instead of treating Sanders like a one-off campaign, they treated him like an icon in the making. Within weeks, the Sanders brand line hit the market. Graphic tees priced at $30 to $50, women's and youth jersey cuts designed to expand his reach, premium authentic Browns game jerseys at $175, and limited edition footwear that climbed to $200. It wasn't just merchandise, it was a curated brand ecosystem. And then came the billboards. Times Square in New York, wrapped in towering screens of Shedeur flashing his signature watch pose. Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, all plastered with his face. Nike wanted the world to understand that Sanders wasn't simply another NFL rookie. He was being positioned as a cultural figure, someone whose influence extended beyond football into fashion, lifestyle, and identity. The campaign was designed with precision. The watch celebration became more than just a touchdown gesture, it became a symbol, something instantly recognizable and easily marketable. Social media campaigns amplified it, influencers mimicked it, and soon fans were posting their own watch poses under Nike hashtags. Sanders wasn't just in the conversation, he was the conversation. What made this rollout different from anything the NFL had seen was the scale. Rookies typically get their moment, a commercial, a photo shoot, maybe a regional endorsement. Sanders was being treated like a global superstar before he had even started a regular season game. Nike wasn't renting his image, they were building an entire movement around him. And crucially, thanks to the Prime Equity Clause, Sanders wasn't just the face of the rollout, he was a stakeholder. Every t-shirt sold, every jersey shipped, every limited sneaker drop that sold out in minutes, all of it put real money in his pocket. This wasn't the league or a brand cashing in on his hype while he waited for his next paycheck. Sanders was cashing in himself, in real time. The strategy worked. Engagement on Nike's football campaigns quadrupled compared to their usual numbers. Social media exploded with shares, likes, and comments. Even rival brands, normally quick to downplay Nike campaigns, couldn't ignore the buzz. Sanders had transcended the rookie label, he was trending as a cultural force. But with success came something else. Pressure. The bigger the rollout, the higher the stakes. And not everyone was thrilled to see a fifth-round pick being marketed like a global superstar. Critics began circling, searching for flaws, digging for controversy. And soon, they found angles to attack. Because if Sanders' rise was meteoric, the backlash waiting for him was just as intense. Every meteoric rise comes with turbulence, and Shedeur Sanders' ascent was no different. As jersey sales soared and Nike plastered his image across billboards, critics began circling like vultures. The narrative quickly shifted from admiration to scrutiny, from celebration to suspicion. And at the center of it all was a question as old as professional sports: why is swagger celebrated in some athletes and condemned in others? The first wave of backlash came after an off-field incident. Earlier that summer, Sanders was cited for speeding once at 91 miles per hour in a 65 zone, and another at 101 in a 60. It wasn't the first time a Browns player had been caught going too fast. Veterans like Myles Garrett had faced similar citations, but the media coverage around Sanders was louder, harsher, and far more personal. Headlines didn't just report the speeding tickets, they painted a picture of immaturity, entitlement, and recklessness. This was the double standard in plain sight. When a seasoned quarterback shows fire on the field, it's praised as competitiveness. When a white rookie flashes confidence, it's called leadership. But when Sanders carried himself with the same confidence, he was labeled arrogant, entitled, and difficult to coach. The language used to describe him wasn't neutral, it carried undertones, the kind that had historically followed outspoken black athletes from Muhammad Ali to Cam Newton. The whispers didn't stop there. Anonymous scouts and executives began leaking character critiques. He blames teammates, they said. He's too focused on his brand. He's more interested in being a celebrity than in being a quarterback. The irony? These were the same executives who had pushed him down to the 5th round because of his Prime Equity Clause demands, the very clause that has since made him a pioneer in sports contracts. Sanders, for his part, didn't fire back. He didn't launch a public war with the media or clap back at critics on social media. Instead, he kept quiet, posted workouts, showed up to practice, and let the numbers speak. His passer rating in preseason action was higher than his rookie competition, his jersey sales shattered records, and Nike continued to elevate his profile. Yet still, the commentary about his attitude lingered like background noise. Inside the Browns' locker room, the tension was real. Veterans respected his poise, but were cautious about the circus that followed him. Younger players admired his brand but wondered if it created distractions. Sanders wasn't just fighting for a roster spot, he was fighting against decades of coded narratives about who gets to be confident and who gets punished for it. The backlash was inevitable, but what made it sting was the hypocrisy. The same traits that turned Joe Burrow into a fan favorite or Baker Mayfield into a marketing darling were suddenly red flags when applied to Shedeur Sanders. The message was clear. His rise wasn't going to be judged on talent alone. It was going to be judged through a lens clouded by perception, stereotypes, and resistance to change. And that made his journey even more important, because every pass he threw, every touchdown he scored, and every jersey he sold wasn't just about football. It was about proving that the old narratives no longer hold power. If the endorsement world made Shedeur Sanders look untouchable, life inside the Cleveland Browns facility told a different story. For all the billboards, jersey sales, and Nike campaigns, Sanders was still a rookie quarterback, drafted 144th overall. And in the NFL, nothing is handed out, especially not a starting job. The Browns entered camp with a crowded quarterback room. Veterans like Joe Flacco brought experience and stability. Rookies like Dylan Gabriel, though less heralded, were hungry and fighting for every rep. Sanders had the hype, the poise, and the brand behind him, but none of that mattered when it came to the depth chart. Coaches made it clear. Snaps would be earned, not gifted. On the field, Sanders started to separate himself quickly. His preseason numbers told the story. A 106 passer rating compared to Gabriel's 66, no turnovers against Gabriel's interception, and a pair of crisp touchdown drives that showcased his accuracy and composure. Teammates quietly noted his ability to command the huddle. He didn't just know the playbook, he exuded the calm of someone who had been preparing for this moment long before draft night. Still, the battle wasn't purely about performance. NFL politics loomed large. A fifth-round pick, no matter how talented, isn't supposed to leapfrog veterans without resistance. Coaches weighed locker room dynamics. Was it worth giving the reins to a rookie who would inevitably bring more media attention and scrutiny? Would the veterans buy in? Or would there be friction if Sanders was elevated too quickly? In practice, Sanders faced another obstacle: limited reps. As the rookie project, he often got fewer snaps than Flacco or even Gabriel. That made every throw in practice more valuable, every preseason drive more critical. Sanders couldn't afford mistakes, because mistakes would reinforce the narrative that he needed more time, more seasoning. Then came the setback. In his second preseason game, Sanders tweaked an oblique muscle. The injury was labeled minor, but it sent a ripple of concern through the facility. Coaches know how quickly momentum can vanish in the NFL. One bad hit, one nagging injury, and the storyline shifts from rising star to sidelined rookie. For Sanders, it was a reminder of how fragile opportunity is. Meanwhile, the external noise didn't help. Pundits questioned whether the Browns could afford the circus that came with Sanders. They debated whether his jersey sales and endorsements were distractions. The double standards lingered. And yet, inside the locker room, players began to notice something. Sanders didn't let the noise change his work habits. He wasn't late, he wasn't arrogant, he was focused. The Browns' quarterback battle wasn't just about skill, it was about trust. Could Sanders convince his coaches that he wasn't just a marketing machine, but a reliable leader under center? Could he convince his teammates that the hype around him wouldn't overshadow the grind of winning games? Those questions hung in the air as preseason wound down. Sanders had shown flashes of brilliance, but the decision loomed. Would the Browns hand him the keys, or keep him waiting behind the veterans? When whispers first leaked that Nike was preparing a signature sneaker line for Shedeur Sanders, many dismissed it as marketing hype. After all, rookie quarterbacks, especially those drafted outside the first round, don't get sneaker deals. At best, they endorse cleats or appear in promotional campaigns. But what Nike was plotting for Sanders wasn't just another athlete partnership. It was something far bolder, an entire line of footwear carrying his name, before he had even played a single regular season snap. The project, according to insiders, had been brewing since his Colorado days. Nike had seen how his watch celebration, his effortless charisma, and his father's legacy created a cultural recipe bigger than football. So they began sketching designs, floating prototypes, with working names like the LL2C and the Proton 982, nods to Sanders' personal style and Dion's iconic 1990 sneaker heritage. These weren't cleats meant only for the gridiron. They were lifestyle shoes meant to hit the streets. The same way Air Jordans had jumped from basketball courts into everyday culture. The idea was simple, yet groundbreaking. Shedeur Sanders wouldn't just be a Nike athlete, he would be a Nike brand. And that shift could change the entire blueprint for how football players, especially quarterbacks, are marketed. Nike's gamble was that Sanders could be more than a quarterback. His jersey sales had already proven his ability to move product. But sneakers are a different universe. They require cultural resonance, not just sports success. To prepare, Nike's marketing team studied the Sanders family brand closely. They tapped into Dion's legendary Diamond Turf legacy, the crossover sneakers that became street staples in the 1990s. They then layered Shedeur's modern flare watches, luxury cars, polished confidence, and envisioned a product line that could speak to both generations. The rollout plan was ambitious. Limited drops timed with key moments in his career. A sneaker launch tied to his first NFL start. Another tied to a Nike commercial featuring both him and his father. Global billboards, social media takeovers, and pop-up events in major cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Atlanta. It wasn't just about selling shoes, it was about positioning Sanders as the next cultural crossover star. Of course, this kind of move came with risk. What if Sanders flamed out on the field? What if his rookie season was rocky or worse, a disaster? Nike knew the criticism would be harsh. Skeptics would say they had invested in hype instead of substance. But Nike also knew the upside. If Sanders succeeded, if he won games while dropping sneakers, the comparison to Jordan wouldn't seem so far-fetched. Football had never had a true sneaker king. Sanders could be the first. By late 2025, prototypes were already being tested. Leaked images showed sleek, futuristic designs with nods to both primetime flash and modern minimalism. Fans went wild online, debating colorways and release dates even before Nike confirmed the line. The message was clear. Shedeur Sanders wasn't just chasing football greatness. He was building an empire, one step and one sneaker at a time. For all the headlines, all the endorsements, and all the staggering numbers, one question still hangs over Shedeur Sanders like a shadow. Can he actually deliver on the field? The hype machine is undeniable. He's got Nike treating him like the face of a new era, jersey sales that broke every rookie record, and now a sneaker line that could reshape football culture. Off the field, Sanders has already won. He's out-earning his rookie contract before taking a regular season snap, he's flipped the endorsement world on its head, and he's rewriting the playbook for how athletes can leverage their own brand. But none of it will matter if the performance doesn't match the promise. That's the brutal truth of the NFL. The league has seen phenoms before, players who dominated headlines only to fade under the weight of expectations. For Sanders, the pressure is magnified. Every throw he makes is judged not just as a quarterback, but as a cultural figure carrying a multi-million-dollar marketing empire on his shoulders. Every interception will be plastered across social media, every mistake amplified by critics eager to prove that he was more hype than substance. And that's the bigger question. Can Sanders balance the business and the game? History suggests the margin for error is razor thin. In the NFL, winning is the only currency that truly matters. Nike can push sneakers, the Browns can sell jerseys, influencers can hype campaigns. But if Sanders doesn't win football games, if he doesn't prove he can lead an NFL franchise, the narrative will turn fast. He risks becoming a cautionary tale, the player who got too much, too soon, without proving himself between the lines. But here's the flip side. If he succeeds, even just enough to show steady growth and flashes of brilliance, the rewards could be historic. Sanders would become the blueprint for a new generation of athletes who see themselves not as employees of a team, but as partners in their own empire. He'd validate the prime equity clause. He'd prove that endorsement power and football excellence don't have to be at odds. And he'd change the conversation about what athletes can demand from both leagues and brands. The stakes, in other words, are bigger than football. Sanders isn't just playing for the Cleveland Browns. He's playing for the future of athlete empowerment, for the idea that players can control their image, their money, and their narrative without waiting for permission from the establishment. And that's why every snap matters. Every completion, every touchdown, every win will be weighed not just as stats, but as proof of concept. Can a rookie fifth-round pick rewrite the balance of power in professional sports? Or will the system swallow him whole, reminding the world that no amount of hype can survive without victories on Sunday? That's the bigger question, and the answer is still being written one throw at a time. If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.